Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, welcome to the world headquarters of the College Art Association. Is everybody having a good conference? Yeah? Great, thank you. We've got one more day. Hope you're finding lots of interesting sessions that you can enjoy. We have a full day again tomorrow. Be sure, before you leave, to stop into the Book and Trade Fair, and also to stop into the Cultural and Academic Network Hall, which is downstairs. There are lots of great roundtable discussions going on there, and there's also interviewing that's happening there, and there are over 50 universities and cultural organizations that are exhibiting their work down there as well. So please be sure to stop by there. By the way, I'm Hunter Ohanian, and I have the distinct pleasure of being the director of the College Art Association. And you can find any of the staff members. We have lots of our staff members here, but we all wave your hands, all of our staff members here. There's Joelle and Vanessa and Daniel. And these guys, Tiffany and Nick and Michelle, we'll have slightly over 4,000 people attending this conference. This is actually $1 million undertaking to put this whole thing on. To think we can spend $1 million on art history and visual arts is really a very good thing. And we will be, as most of you know, the CAA conference is in February. And as you plan your calendars going forward, next year we'll be in New York. The year after that, we're committed to being in Chicago. The year after that, we'll be back in New York, and then we'll be in Chicago. We just signed an agreement with a Hilton for 36,000 room nights. I better get a lot of Hilton honors as far as I'm concerned. So anyway, let's get going. This is a major part of what the CAA annual conference is about. And as you know, we cannot pull this off without very important sponsors that actually help us get all of these activities off the ground. We're very fortunate to partner with Sotheby's Institute of Art, which is the presenting sponsor for our artist interviews. Please allow me to introduce to you Jonathan Neal, the director of Sotheby's Institute of Art here in Los Angeles. Before joining Sotheby's, Jonathan held editorial positions at Art Review Magazine, the Drawing Center, and Brooklyn Rail. He's taught extensively on contemporary art and architectural history, critical writing, and the history of photography at Columbia and the New School. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jonathan Neal.
So I'll be very brief. Welcome to this presentation of Distinguished Artist Interviews. My name is Jonathan Neal. I was talking to a colleague yesterday about the conference, and she was extremely eager about exactly these two interviews that you're about to see. So we're happy to be a part of it. We're happy to be able to partner with the College Art Association and with Hunter and his team in order to make these things happen. Our programs are partnered here in Los Angeles with Claremont Graduate University, with their School of Arts and Humanities, with the Drucker School of Management, with the Getty Leadership Institute, and newly with their Department of Art and their Center for Information Systems and Technology. So we're quite spread across almost the entirety of our university, and we're very pleased that our students, when they graduate, want to come and help make events like this happen. They want to be advocates for, promoters of, and connectors for art and artists and the cultural communities that support them. So this is exactly the kind of place and exactly the kind of time that our students want to be involved, and so it gives me great pleasure to take part in this. And with that, I will say thank you, Hunter, and thank you, CAA.
Okay, now before we get started, I have to ask everybody in the room to practice being very, very quiet. And actually, Tiffany, can we either leave the door open or we need to stop people from coming in and out of that door just so we don't hear the noise? This will just be. But everybody get comfortable in your chairs, and everybody needs to be very quiet. Now, 10 years ago at the CAA annual conference, Yoko Ono was present, and she was interviewed by Jonathan Feinberg. At that time, she presented the attendees with the shards of a Chinese vase, and she asked that they actually be returned together in one place. we have the shards that have been returned to us so far. Now, with a show of hands, does anybody here have a shard with them? Yes. You hang on to your shard. We'll put it in here just for a moment and then give it back to you, okay? Anybody else have one of their shards with them? Okay, very good. You were there 10 years ago. So we're now 10 years later, and we've asked members to come back. And we are bringing this back that Yoko Ono has wanted us to bring back here. I would now like to introduce Jonathan Feinberg, who's been a member of CAA since 1966. And he is the individual behind the artist interviews when he began them and started the annual interviews with artists, with 3 artists at that time, Christo, Elizabeth Murray, and Alice Alcock. Jonathan is the director of the PhD program at the University of Arts in Philadelphia. You can't applaud right now because everyone's being so quiet, which is really good. But please welcome Jonathan Feinberg.
Well, I actually wrote a few remarks down. I wrote them on paper, and if I start coughing too much, I'm going to get Buzz Spector to come up here and impersonate me, so that may happen. You just heard the history of what happened. I couldn't believe it when I asked Yoko if she would let me interview her about her childhood, and she did, and she even made a video of her home movies from her childhood, which she stood up and narrated. It was really an incredibly, poignant moment. It was wonderful. And then she did this performance, and she gave everybody in the audience a flashlight, and we all had to signal "I love you" to each other. And then she laid out this pile. I mean, this is a really small pile of shards, but the pile was like this high. She had 2 vases. One was the size of her, and Hunter's still got it in her office, in his office, and the other one was smashed into 1,000 pieces, and people took them home. So this fall, Yoko's now 85, and I reminded her that that this is the 10th anniversary. I said, you've got to do something for college art. And I knew she wouldn't be able to come, and so we agreed that she would record a poem for you. So it's a beautiful Fluxus poem, and because I said to her, if ever there was a year for using our imaginations to put the pieces back together, boy, this is the year. So, a year after, or a year with Donald Trump and the burgeoning of the Me Too movement, she recorded a really beautiful Fluxus poem, I think with all of that in mind. So I'm going to ask them to play that.
Touch.
Niku, it's now up to you.
You can now be a little noisy if you want. There you go. Now that's what I'm talking about. Okay, because we're CAA. You got to get a little wild now. And also because we're going to have a great program in here coming up. I have to do a little bit of business and tell you about our room, and then we will get on with the most wonderful distinguished artist interviews. So hello, my name is Niku Kashev. I am the chair of CAA's Services to Artists Committee. And welcome to Art Space. This space, all of the programs that are in here are free and open to the public. Art Space was initiated in 2001. Art Space panels and programs have been organized by the SAC. And by the way, where are my SAC members that have organized stuff in here? Can you just stand up for a second? And all of the staff at CAA that's helped get all of this free programming in here. One more time, can I see your hands? Thank you, staff, and thank you, SAC. And thank you, Hunter, for letting us have these programs. So what we do in here is we offer a conference within the conference that's tailored to the interests and needs of artists, but is open to all conference attendees, and it's free and open to the public. Art Space works in tandem with 3 affiliated SAC programs. One is the Media Lounge, which was in the Fabulous Theater. The second is this program, the Distinguished Artist Interviews. Thank you for starting that. We love it. And the third, following immediately after the Distinguished Artist Interviews, is Art Exchange, happening in the Concourse Foyer at 5:30. We hope you come to support the artists that will be down there. Tomorrow, we will also hold a special Saturday Artist Resource Roundtable session in here at 10:30. Please come and join us. It is now my really great honor and pleasure to introduce this program, which is the Distinguished Artist Interview, which this is probably the most packed room we have, right? And especially as an Angelino, I'm especially excited about these artists. Today, we will have Catherine Opie, interviewed by Helen Molesworth. Working between conceptual and documentary approaches to image making, Catherine Opie examines genres of portraiture, landscape, studio photography, documenting political movements, queer subcultures, and urban transformation. She received a BFA from the San Francisco Art Institute, an MFA from CalArts. Since 2001, she's taught at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. She's received many awards, of course, including the President's Award for Lifetime Achievement from the Women's Caucus of Art in 2009, the United States Artist Fellowship in 2006, Larry Aldrich Award in 2004, and the CalArts Alpert Award in the Arts in 2003. Her work has appeared in major exhibitions, including at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston in 2011, which is important, it'll come up in a second, at LACMA in 2010, the Guggenheim Museum in New York in 2008, MCA Chicago in 2006, and the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis in 2002. Catherine Opie lives and works in Los Angeles. She will be interviewed today by Helen Molesworth, who is the chief curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art at MoCA here in Los Angeles. She's a scholar, a writer, a curator, and prior to being at MoCA, Helen was at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston, where she assembled a one-person exhibition for Catherine Opie entitled Catherine Opie, Empty and Full, and that was in 2011. So please welcome our first series of Distinguished Artist Interviews today.
Check. I think, I hope. No, you're not on. Let me look. It should.
Cathy's a gearhead.
Check, check. Check. Not that much of a gearhead, apparently. So it's good to have some help out there, huh?
Hi, everybody. Whoa.
I know.
Hi, Cathy.
Hi, Helen.
Cathy and I have known each other for quite a long time.
Yeah, I was interested because I feel kind of like this is almost a living room talk. And I don't think that there's many artists who get to work with a curator over a period of time. And I actually thought it might be interesting to actually not only, kind of create an interview in which Helen's interviewing me, but also just the relationship of what it means as a curator to have looked at my work for as many years as you have and you've thought about it.
Well, one of the things I'm interested in, actually, in terms of being a contemporary curator, is not always searching for the new, but rather pretty early on feeling like I made a set of commitments to a group of people, and you were one of them. Your work was work I felt really helped me move through the world, helped me think about the world. And it became an interesting idea that I didn't really know was going to pan out to be this great. I was young, so I thought, I'm going to commit to a body of people, and that's going to be an ethical decision. And it was like a theoretical thing I was doing. I didn't really understand that 20 years later, we would be doing gigs like this, and that we would be friends, and that we would have done so much together. So it was one of those dumb things I did when I was young that has really panned out. Very happy about it.
I appreciate it. I mean, there's probably other curators maybe potentially in the audience that I have worked with as well. So obviously, I appreciate every kind of opportunity when you get to work with a great curator. But one of the interesting things is I'm kind of known for not really being that easy to curate, because I'm a fairly decisive person. And Helen is one of the few people have kind of, we can go to the kind of loop of the slides, but you'll see our first exhibition together, which was at the ICA in Boston, called Empty and Full. And it was the first time that I actually, as an artist, did not go to install my work, which was incredibly frightening for me because I am a bit of a control freak. But I trusted you.
Why?
And,
Why did you let me do that?
I think that I let you do that because you were seeing something in my work that I didn't see myself. And I realized that a lot of the struggles that I've had as an artist is that I work in such kind of sequential ideas of bodies of work. And even when I did the Guggenheim show, it's very hard for me to mix up ideas and work together. That I often think like, okay, I'm making this, now I'm making this. Mm-hmm. And you were able to, because we had worked on the Venice proposal, you were able to begin to see the work in a way that I myself hadn't thought about it. Mm-hmm. And so it was incredibly exciting because I was like, oh, I need this actually. I need to give up this kind of control at this point in my life.
I actually think that's really true. I do think that historically one of the roles of the curator had been precisely the distance that she could bring to the work, or the reframing that she could bring to the work that was different than what the artist was saying. And I think there was a moment in the 60s and 70s where there was a kind of opposition on the part of artists to conventional museum structures, which was a completely reasonable rebellion on their part. But one of the things it did was it pushed curators into their more contemporary iteration, which is actually more of a producer than coming to the work from specifically an art historical background and really trying to think about the work within this long durée of art history, and to bring those methodological ways of thinking about work to the table, and to not be as involved in the production, the producer kind of model of curating. So, and you make a body of work that rewards an art historical gaze enormously. And not everybody makes that kind of work. So like when you look at Cathy's work, if you're trained as an art historian, as most of the people in this room are, you know the deep and abiding pleasure that the work provides, right? Because it flatters your knowledge base, basically. It activates your knowledge base and makes you feel really...
I'm turning red now.
Smart. So...
Do we have a remote for slides?
We do.
Should we just like let things go through?
I don't know where the actual...
I think it's
there
over
it is.
yonder.
Okay, but I want to just... Wait. We got to go back.
Okay. Oh, you want to go back?
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. My first self-portrait.
Okay. So...
I'm 9.
I know that this is like the horrible kind of old art history that people of my generation were taught never, ever, ever to participate in, but everything is already in that picture. I love this picture because everything is already in it.
awkward baby butch with a zipper half down and a pair of flowered pants?
Yes!
It is.
Yes! I loves me an awkward baby butch.
Nothing like an awkward baby butch. It's
If
true.
I were teaching right now, it'd be the seminar topic I'd be most invested in teaching.
Right.
Awkward baby butch 1, spring. Awkward baby butch 2, winter. No, but there it is. So, extraordinary, fearless self-presentation in front of the camera. Already what I would call an ethical gaze. Super strong figure ground compositional structure, which repeats throughout Opie's career. A marriage of the genres of portraiture and landscape, something that repeats throughout Opie's career. An uncanny ability to register the horizon line even when it's not actually operative, which if you look at Opie's pictures, there's pictures where everything is structured by the horizon line, and then there's pictures where the horizon line is submerged and yet is still acting as a kind of subliminal compositional structuring rhetoric. And then already it's so queer, and it's so much about America.
And I realized all of that at 9 years old. Yeah.
That was going to be my first question. How did you know at 9? Who took that picture?
I did.
So
I mean,
what
I
are you
set it
doing?
up.
You set it
I
up?
set it up on a tripod. You can see that actually the framing wasn't correct because the way that I wound the film and the camera wasn't all the way through. But I set it up on the tripod, and I set the self-timer and posed like that for the photograph in front of my house in Sandusky, Ohio. Right. So, and it was after I wrote a book report on Lewis Hine and told my parents that I wanted a camera for my birthday because I wanted to be a social documentary photographer, but I probably didn't say social documentary photographer because I was actually not that sophisticated at 9 years old in Sandusky, Ohio. But I told them that I wanted to take pictures, and I wanted to take pictures of my neighborhood.
Right.
So,
Right.
and that was probably the third picture on the roll of the first film. The first picture was my dad at the kitchen table with his army mug from the army, with his hair all slicked back, looking like a 50s businessman, which my dad did look like. The second was my mom in her bathrobe with her hair all a muss, and she kind of looks like a transsexual in the image, which is like, you know, one of the things is I've always been called sir my whole life, as well as my mother. You know my mom.
I do.
Lou's tough.
She is tough. And I would never call her sir.
So then this was the third picture in the roll, and then the fourth picture was my brother.
Right.
So it was like, yeah, those were the first four.
Pretty good. Okay, now we can let them just roll.
Okay,
I
now
just
we're
didn't
gonna
want.
let
I
'em
didn't want to
roll?
miss that moment.
Okay.
That's a rare early Opie photograph.
So Empty and Full, this was the first, again, it was the first show that we did officially together as a solo exhibition.
Right.
And this is your structure of the exhibition. And again, it's something that I didn't come up with, but I really, really appreciated it. So I was thinking that, you know, maybe we both could talk about this a little bit in terms of the structure.
Sure. So this exhibition brought together, I mean, I'll say two bodies of work, even though it was more than two bodies of work. There was one body of work which was an extraordinary set of seascapes that Cathy took on a Hanjin container ship from Seoul to Long Beach. So she made the Pacific crossing on a container ship. And the sort of task she set herself was to take a picture at every sunrise and every sunset. And the horizon line remains the same through all 20 of the photographs, right? Because is it 10 days? I forget now.
It was 10
You were
days, so it's
10
20,
days,
yeah.
20 photographs. And it begins, it's actually 22, because there's a picture of like the departure from the Seoul dock and then the arrival at Long Beach.
Right.
And some of the landscapes are super straightforward, and some you're just looking at mist. I mean, you couldn't know where the horizon line was. I mean, it's just this vaporous water sky, sort of ineffable mixture of air and water. And I love this series because it's I don't know if I've ever done this, because there's nothing cornier
Then a sunrise or a
than
sunset.
a sunrise or a sunset.
Yeah.
And I know that everyone in this room has a couple on their iPhone, and you take them, they're gonna suck, the sun is actually gonna set and rise again tomorrow. So the ball, to me, it just felt super ballsy, actually, to say I'm actually gonna do this. I'm gonna bring the fullness of my aesthetic sensibility and aesthetic prowess to bear on this almost Hallmark sort of moment, this sentimental moment. And the pictures are really ravishing, and they're also all really good. How did that happen?
Well, it was hours editing. That's the beauty of it all, right? You get to edit. And this is a move, when I made the ice houses and surfers, those were actually with an 8x10 camera. But I did not take an 8x10 camera on the boat with me. At this point, I'm shooting with a 50 megapixel back. For those geeky photography people out there, I use a Hasselblad H2 with a phase 1 back. And so I'm taking this on the boat, and literally I'm setting up a tripod because it depends on light, and I'm sitting there for 4 hours watching the sunrise in the morning and for 4 hours in the evening. And, that's all I had to do was make this body of work. I got this phone call one day. So how do you go on a container ship, right? Some of you are wondering. I get this weird phone call. It was like, congratulations, you've won a prize. I'm like, oh, fantastic. What kind of prize did I win? They're like, well, we want to commission you to go on a container ship from Korea to Long Beach or from Long Beach to Korea, your choice. And whatever you make, Hanjin gets the body of work and you get to keep the rest. And we'll pay you to do this X amount of money. I was like, oh, well, what do you need from me? And they're like, well, we need a proposal about what you would do. And I was like, I've never been on a container ship. I don't know what I would do. I mean, obviously, studying at CalArts with Alan Sekula, Alan was like, what do you mean you get to go on the container ship? And I was like, yeah, they just called me. I won this prize. And Alan's like, well, can you get me on a container ship? And I'm like, well, sure, Alan, I'll get you on a container ship, too. That's not a problem. I'll call Hanjin, and we'll get you on another ship. And so here I am, with Alan, on my shoulder and thinking about, well, I'm not actually going to kind of tread in the territory of Sekula land where I'm talking about ideas of commerce and capitalism. I'm going to take every sunrise and sunset. And so that's what I did, but I did take a lot of photographs on the ship because you're there for a long time and But it was funny because to get the horizon line perfect, that was the hardest thing. So you have a grid in your camera, because I always shoot with a grid in my camera because I'm into lines. And so the ship, literally, you're going over like this, and you're looking through the camera, and then you go click when it lines up on the line, and then you go back over like that. And you're doing that for 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours at the night with the wind on you and everything. So the photographs are actually incredibly peaceful, but the whole experience was horrendous.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about the food.
Oh, the food was horrible. I wrote a journal, a ship log. That was another part, and the only time it ever showed was at the Long Beach Art Museum, where they showed the entire body of work with a ship log. But it was basically me saying, I had another whole hot dog and a bowl of broth today. I'm not really sure what I should think about this. So, but it was something else. And also, Han Jin was like, oh my God, the captain's gonna love you. You're gonna be invited to the captain's table every night. I was thinking the captain's table. And so a student who actually grew up in Korea went with me because they didn't tell me anything. I thought maybe I would need translators and maybe it would help to have him with me. And he was seasick the whole time, poor guy. And I didn't need translators. There was absolutely no Koreans on the ship except for Dong, and he was sick. And the captain never invited us to the table. They would look at us and they would speak about us in German, it wasn't a friendly experience at all. But I made sunrises and sunsets.
You did. You made these beautiful sunrises and sunsets.
So why did you decide to structure the show this way?
So then the other body of work, which is actually a couple different bodies of work, but they were all involved Opie going out and taking photographs of people exercising their right of assembly in this country. And this is pre the current moment. So this all happens under the Obama administration, which, for those of you who are finding it hard to remember the Obama administration, recall that the bad guys then were the Tea Party people, who they seem almost benign at the moment. I mean, So anyway, but Cathy had taken a series of photographs of people protesting in the street, of the Michigan Women's Festival, the Boy Scout Jamboree, and I was really, really interested in the compassion and the ethical kind of comportment with which you were able to take photographs of protests for gay marriage, because gay marriage hadn't become fully
Prop 9.
legal yet, Prop 9 in California,
Yeah,
and Tea Party people.
yeah,
And
down in San Diego.
And the photographs, it's not like they were pretending to any kind of like grade school idea that we might have about like everybody having an equal say or showing both sides. It didn't have that kind of anodyne sensibility. What it had was, for my way of thinking, a structural sensibility about the right of assembly. Right, and what it meant to really believe in the right of assembly. And there was something I thought around the sunsets and the sunrises, which was partially about time and trying to take these protests that are so heated in the moment and to hold them in relationship to this other kind of time, so political time versus natural time, and trying to think about that long arc of history, and yet the sunrises and sunsets also, nothing is more daily than a sunrise and a sunset, right? So it's both timeless and absolutely quotidian at the same time. And I was thinking that the right of assembly has that kind of quality in American life. This all sounds like ridiculously something, now, because now everything feels very different. And yet the sun rose today and will set today, as we know. And this too, this nonsense, this evil nonsense we are living through, shall pass. And so that was something I was interested in. And I was also really interested in the way in which the seascapes brought out the compositional structure of the assembly photographs, which were essentially landscape photographs that were populated with people. And so I was interested in the way, and I've always been interested in the way Opie marries landscape and portraiture, which are these genres that are, typically sort of held as some sort of antinomy. And I actually thought about you a lot last week when the Kehinde Wiley portrait of Obama came
Yeah,
out.
I know.
And I
know.
mean, I think Kehinde is extremely smart and knows his contemporary art very, very well, and wondered how much of your marriage of portraiture
Interesting.
and landscape had somehow, inflected his thought in whatever way it is that those sorts of things happen
Yeah.
between artists. And so that's the kind of picture I mean. Like, there's always there's always this subliminal horizon line that happens in Opie's work, and for some reason, I find this a very profound thing that happens in the pictures, because I think it's a kind of hewing to the deep history of compositional strategies in Western art, and the way Opie is content to sort of pull that deep history through to the present. And the other thing is, I think it sets up figure-ground relationships, which I think kind of tie in, and this is maybe, I'm not sure if I can really do this in like a few sentences. One of the things I've always thought was so extraordinary about your portraits is the ethical relationship between you and the sitter, a relationship of extreme parity. Right, and so all that kind of talk about the gaze and objectification and representation sort of falls away for me in an Opie photograph. And there's this sense of what I might call as like Levinas's sense of ethics coming from this face-to-face encounter, in which our sense of ethics comes to us not because we are the same or similar, but rather your ethics are tested when you are confronting true difference. The difference between you and me is where I have to have an ethical relationship to you because you are different from me, not because you are the same as I am or similar to me. And that is a kind of a binarism that's rendered ethical, and that Opie's very strong compositional commitment to the horizon line is setting up a figure-ground relationship without which I don't think we can have a conversation about ethics in the visual. And so like those things really felt alive to me, and that you could take pictures of Tea Party protests and the people who were fighting against the rights we were asking for at that moment, which was marriage rights for queer folk like ourselves. And you could take the queer folk out on the street. Like that to me just felt really, really important to kind of hold on to.
Well, the notion of democracy is incredibly complicated. And I think that, it was interesting because a lot of questions came up to me early on with work. Somebody pointed out to me that, you empty out cities and you empty out your landscape, but you only photograph queer people. You only make portraits of queer people. And I was like, am I really doing that? And I had to think about it, and there was a certain way that was happening. And then I started making a body of work that was really important for me that followed up from a body of work called 1999, where I traveled around the U.S. right before our quaint fear, as I call it now, Y2K, right? We're going to lose all our information. This is the quaint fear before what we're in now. And that was, again, like really thinking about the relationship of American identity and the road trip and the history of photography and the road trip. But then I felt like it was a body of work that hung out there all by itself, and so then I made In and Around Home, which was me living in West Adams in my neighborhood in relationship to the re-election of Bush, which happened, and taking Polaroids off the TV. And all of a sudden I was back on the streets again in a very different way than 1999 was, because 1999 really didn't have any figures in it. But I was going to like USC tailgate parties, and I was going to Martin Luther King parades, and I was actually kind of going back to being almost like a street photographer of what I was trained doing in San Francisco, studying with Hank Wessel and Larry Salton and folks like that. And so it was all of a sudden then I realized, oh, it's actually really important for me to begin to map out an idea of America in relationship to conflict and protest. And so from there, it was first the immigration march, and then flying to D.C. to photograph the inauguration of Obama, and then just continuing through these different protests. And then also the kind of binary of landscape in relationship to the same summer going to the 100th anniversary of the Boy Scout Jamboree, which is something else, and then also going to one of the last Michigan Women's Music Festivals, which was actually, Helen and I had to remove an image from the exhibition. Which was, I was in New Zealand at the time, and we were talking, and the cell phone bill was horrible. But we were like lawyering up, basically, and it was really a really interesting, it was so kind of surprising to have spent a lifetime mapping out ideas of community, especially queer community, to then have two women that were represented in one of my photographs for it to be asked to be removed from the wall of the museum, which we honored. I don't believe in that type of censorship at all. And it was a really hard decision for us to remove it. And you won't see it in the slideshow either. It's they wanted us to remove it from the catalog and get rid of the catalog. And we basically said, no, we're not going to do that. This is an entire show with an enormous amount of work in it, and I'm not going to burn books. I won't do that. I'll agree to never exhibit it again, and I'll agree never to print it and show it in any of my lectures, but I won't agree to have my catalog.
Yeah.
But
What do you think we would do now?
well, it's so interesting now,
that
right?
we live in the age
now,
of the new iconoclasm. Yeah. What
I
do you
don't think we
we'd
would have
do?
taken it down. I actually think that we were being good, responsible lesbians, and it shocked us. No, I actually, in a certain way.
So boring.
I know.
Hate being a good, responsible lesbian.
No, I think we were so shocked that members of our own community that we really felt that we needed to honor their wishes and remove the piece. And also, I had never had such hate thrown my way. I mean, I have in terms of trolls on the internet, but not from my own community. So what people were saying on the internet as I was sitting there in New Zealand, like freaking out, and my wife Julie going like, would you please stop reading all of it, Cathy? And I'm like, I can't stop. Like, this is really, like, I don't know how to navigate this. And basically the argument is that there's probably a number of you have gone to Michigan Women's Music Festival in this audience, and the policy is a no photography policy. And you agree to that when you enter, that you can take photographs if you have the permission of people who are going to be represented in the photograph. But at that point in time, the internet was alive and well. And so you would go Google Mishfest, and you would just see hundreds of images from the festival. And so if I wanted to push it all away and take it to court, I could have, and I probably would have won, but I didn't want to. I guess I just didn't want to piss off this community that's so important to me in the fact that I've spent a good portion of my life thinking about identity politics and what it is to represent a community that wasn't really represented before in a loving, good way. Mm-hmm. And the photograph is so frickin' beautiful. It was really hard for us to say goodbye to it, but we did.
We did. All right, so
Going on.
your show is still up now at Regan?
No, it came down.
Tragic.
Yeah. So we should talk about
Cathy
this.
just made a film.
Yeah, I did.
So Cathy Opie, the great still photographer of our time, has just made her first moving image work. She built a theater for it in the gallery space. Michael Maltzin designed the theater. And the film is entitled The Modernist. And I think we have
We have a clip. Should
we have
we
like
show a little?
a minute and a half
this is
clip,
a
and I
little
want to talk
tease.
about it a little bit because it really is a kind of a culmination and a departure, which is always the most interesting kind of moment, or one of the most interesting moments in an artist's career, when they do something that is both seems absolutely of a piece with everything they've done and a break simultaneously. So I don't know who's running
I think the tech people back there are prepping it. Is that?
There you are. Can you
Yeah?
guys run that now? Is that possible? Thank you. So that person, whose name is Pigpen, who's been a muse of yours for years,
Yeah, for 30 years.
proceeds to set fire to many of Los Angeles' most iconic modernist domestic structures.
Yeah.
So it could have this film could have easily been called The Arsonist as well as
It
The
could.
Modernist. And he reads, Pigpen reads, because I think the gender assignation is super ambiguous.
she, they.
He, she, they, Pigpen, reads the newspaper every morning with the delight of the arsonist upon seeing the newspaper coverage of these burning houses. So for me, the film is very much like a culmination of your relationship
Yeah.
with Pigpen, this muse you've had, this portrait of this person. You've taken a lot of pictures of Pigpen over the course of your 25-year friendship. It's a landscape film because there is nothing more iconic than modernist houses in the hills of Los Angeles, and there's nothing more kind of Cathy's bravery in the face of cliche, fire in the hills, all that kind of stuff.
And it really happens.
It really does happen. It's a cliche because it happens. But it is, in some ways, your first foray into the illegal, into crime, into criminality.
I never thought about that, Helen. It is. I mean, I'm always such a good girl.
You are such a good girl. You make good girl pictures. You're a good, upstanding member of your academic community.
I believe
You're
in
the
being a
mayor
good
of LA's
citizen.
artist
This is
community.
true.
You-
That's my
right,
nickname.
all of these things. And you have just made a film where a kind of radical subject
Yeah.
basically gives way, we might say, to the rage many of us feel.
Yeah.
Although no rage is depicted in this film is utterly rational and utterly calm. But that kind of let's burn this fucker down, that feeling suffuses the scenes where these houses catch on fire.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about, on the one hand, or not on the one hand, about the tension in the film between the beauty of those houses and the extraordinary way Pigpen looks and the precision of the photographs and this profoundly destructive, angry pleasure
Yeah.
that's happening as well.
Yeah, it's a really complicated piece, and one of the things in terms of maneuvering always between portraiture and landscape and ideas around identity politics and also the politics of our time is what to do right now as an artist. And I think that a lot of us probably feel that after, I actually started making the piece before Trump was elected. In the piece, which is 22 minutes long and encompasses about 875 still images, you never once see Trump's name, which is really important to me. But you see, I'll give you a little bit of outline of it for some of you actually might have seen it here. But basically the character, Pigpen, my friend, is an artist. And he lives in one room, which is my old studio in West Adams. And it was the last thing I made in that studio after working in that studio, 500 square foot studio for over 15 years. And he gets the LA Times every day. And the first article he reads in the LA Times is the fact that a horrible arson had happened, which is real news. And it's in an impoverished trailer park. And he is starting to work on collages of Julius Schulman photographs of modernist houses. There you see him starting to pin them up on the wall. And so throughout that, he then starts cutting out articles and language, which is almost like slam poetry, and placing them over the photographs and begins to collage them. And then he basically gets brave enough to go to some of these houses and start burning them down. So he burns down a total of 5 houses, 5 iconic houses in LA over this course, and he's both a hero and a villain. And the wall of modernist houses and beautiful photographs of Julius Schulman, which is a whole other layered story of him and I and our relationship. He told me that on a panel in public one time, that I made the ugliest photographs of Los Angeles than any photographer he knew. So I actually like that. And then after he passed away, I actually won the Julius Schulman Award, and I was like, "Are you sure you want to give this to me?" He really didn't like me. But anyway, so the character is, so he basically starts collaging out of the newspaper and cutting things up from the newspaper, and that is his artwork. So he's really the artist and the protagonist to a certain extent in this piece. And he just slowly goes to these places. He's buying flowers now in Ralph's because he's a human being. Because it's really important in whatever I do that humanity is the forefront. So even in relationship to difficulty, like the idea of humanity is that way, like where people call me the mayor in a certain way, and I'd say that I'm a good girl is because I actually like believe in kind of humanity and good citizenship and that kind of weird bullshit that I was taught in being born in 1961, you know? And so now he's like making little fires in the backyard. And so basically it ends with him completing the mural and holding a match up to it. And it doesn't end with anything in relationship to his own destruction or him getting caught or anything like that. It really ends because it ends in our relationship to questioning not only the media in terms of fake news and real news and the time that we're living in, but that what was also a utopic dream of modernism is no longer viable anymore. And especially the housing crisis we have in Los Angeles right now. So it was basically trying to fulfill all these questions in terms of politics, not only of our time, but also how it can expand. And it's a conversation, obviously, with Chris Marker's La Jetée. You can't not think about La Jetée and obviously know that that's what I'm having a conversation with this piece. And where La Jetée is about the fear of the future in relationship to the nuclear war through the rhetoric today of today's politics, the fear is based within this notion of the past or nostalgia and how that begins to operate and in terms of desire is utterly fascinating to me with the kind of rhetoric that's happening today. And so the piece basically just tries to, as I call it, it maps out all of these ideas that I've had within various bodies of work plus the kitchen sink. And that's kind of what I was trying to do with it.
All right, so I'm going to ask you one question that you
Okay.
don't know,
Okay,
because we have to end.
on the spot. Oh, we have to end.
We have to
Okay.
end. This is going to be the last question.
Okay.
And it's a question I've been asking every artist or every one that I've interviewed in public since since these crackers stole the election. So,
Okay.
what is your definition of, or what does freedom mean to you?
Well, freedom is complicated, right? I mean, I as somebody who grew up literally in the Rust Belt of America and that identity being placed on me, you know, my father owned the largest political campaign collection in America. I grew up with all the Lincoln stereotypes around me that are all housed in the Smithsonian now. I remember when I was handed an American flag that was flown over the Capitol in my name because my dad called the senator to have him do that. Like I was raised to believe that being an American was about freedom, and then I had to ask all those tough questions, even from an early childhood, in relationship to the news in Vietnam and Kent State, and just watching the struggle of the notion of freedom in terms of democracy. And I don't know if I believe in a notion of freedom. I think that it's unfortunately a really amazing thing to think that one can have it, but I know that in my lifetime I've had my life threatened for being the dyke that I am. And I think that I really appreciate that I've had the freedom to make the work that I've been able to make as an artist that I wouldn't have had in other countries, and I completely acknowledge that. But I also believe that America's idea of democracy is a really punishing notion of democracy as well in relationship to global politics. And so it's very difficult to know what freedom really means, except for the notion of freedom of expression. But as I said before, we even removed a piece from the museum. So that's the way that I guess we're ending this. But I swear I'm much more optimistic than I sound. I think we're going to take questions now,
Yeah,
right?
we're opening up to questions. And will you let us know when we should not be doing questions anymore?
Stop the question.
Great.
Grab a mic and see if I can run it to some audience members. Anybody have questions? I'll come run to you. Point to where I'm going. This young man.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hello. This is a question for Helen. I was wondering when the first time was that you saw Catherine's work, and what the context was, and maybe your reaction to it.
I was probably like 1989, 1990. You had a series of photographs. I saw the Freeway series. Those are the first. Well, no, I saw
those weren't made till '94.
I saw the
You saw Being and
I
Having.
saw Being and
You
Having
saw Being and
first.
Having. Yeah. Probably in that women's collective in New York. Like that
But you
was.
know, really, I'm going to cop to something super embarrassing. Being and Having sort of scared the shit out of me. I didn't really know what to make of those pictures. Like,
Usually it's
whatever,
pervert.
man.
Usually it was pervert that scared the shit out of people.
Pervert did not scare me.
Oh, that's,
being and having scared me.
Oh, that's interesting.
Being and having scared me, because I was like, I don't know, do I want to be, do I want to have, like,
I don't know, man. What's Cathy
like,
saying
can
here?
I do both? I want to be the phallus. I want to have the phallus. I am the phallus. Fuck the phallus. So I didn't really know what to do with those pictures. But the first pictures that made me think that Cathy Opie was a great artist who I wanted to like keep looking at were the freeways. Because those, I thought because of course they emerged sort of like at what I could now call the tail end of a pictures generation moment. And there was a kind of non-ironic relationship to the photograph as a form of image making, as an object, the use of sepia, the time travel, like were the freeways architectural relics from the past? Was it a post-apocalyptic vision? You know, all of that really jazzed me. Like the scale of them, you know, we had been looking at a lot of increasingly large photographs, and again, the kind of bravery to make them, they were really small. And so your physical relationship to them was very intimate. And from that point, I would say I committed to thinking about and looking and being with the work. Yeah.
We have one more question, and then we're going to have to switch. Yeah? Right here? Yeah, coming to you.
Hi. Would you mind talking about your work where you did drawings on your body?
You mean the cuttings?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. What would you like to know? Why I did it?
Yeah,
How I did it?
yeah, I'd like to hear about your process and partly just because it seemed like some of them were on your back. Is that right?
Well, there's the two stick figure girls with the house that's on my back with, you know, which was really, you know, it was something that I doodled for a year after my first domestic relationship. I broke up and I thought, you know, I'm like one of those sappy people that like really wanted to be married and have kids and really believed in domesticity. I explored that in numerous bodies of work. So I asked my friend Judy Baca, the artist, to do the cutting because even though I was obviously involved with amazing body workers like Raylan Galena and part of that community in San Francisco in terms of the leather community, especially that cutting, I wanted to be very tentative. I wanted it to show the fear of cutting into the skin, where pervert doesn't show the fear at all. And most people think that pervert's a tattoo, but pervert's just a perfect cutting because Raylan Galena did it. And it was made to be permanent. And you can see it in self-portrait nursing as well, still very clearly the scars of pervert. And I wanted to play with blood. It was a time in the, you know, quite frankly, in terms of the height of the AIDS epidemic. It was the first time that men and women were actually in San Francisco after we've watched so many of our friends taking care of them and friends dying, that I decided that it was really important to talk about blood as a queer body and a leather dyke. And that I wanted to be this medium in which I used for drawing. That it was like very early on kind of ideas around identity politic. Now, when I made the work, I was not an exhibiting artist at the point. And I'll have to say, when the work first showed, Pervert first showed in the 95 Whitney, Tammy Ray was there with me at that opening. And it was hard for me. I was really surprised going out of my community, which was what I considered like an amazing, awesome community. I mean, you know, I was part of the Outcasts in the 80s with like Gail Rubin and Pat Califia. I mean, it was like, we were like radicals, you know? We were like really enjoying the relationship of what it was to be radical as well as mourning. And I think it's very interesting to be radical and mourning at the same time. And I think that we're all mourning a little bit in relationship to our country right now. And what does that mean for us as radicals as well? And so it's really using language in that way, in the same way that Making the Modernist plays with those, even those beginning early ideas, that it is a queer body, a trans body in the space. And that's why I made them, basically, is I needed to talk about blood, and I needed to talk about identity, and I needed to talk about longing, and I needed to talk about visibility. And it was all super important to me, and it still is.
Thank you
Okay,
so much.
thank you very much.
So if you just give us 1 minute, I'm going to read you some more introductions once we settle down. Thank you so much, Cathy and Helen. Thank you. We always have these like mass movements that happen between these interviews. It's very interesting. It's like a migration. So, thank you again, and I hope you enjoyed that. Let me read you and introduce our next set of distinguished artist interviews. Let me just wait till we get the doors closed again, though, so we can lose the sound of the hallway. Alice, would you shut the door for me? Thank you. Perfect. All right. So, thank you so much. It's great to see you again. Hope you are excited for our next distinguished artist, as I am. Our next distinguished artist is Judy Baca, interviewed by Anna Indych-López. So, Judy Baca is an artist, educator, scholar, activist, and community arts pioneer. She's been creating public art for 3 decades. Powerful in size and subject matter, Baca's murals bring art to where people live and work. In 1974, she founded the City of Los Angeles' first mural program, which produced over 400 murals and employed thousands of local participants. She's the co-founder and artistic director of the Social and Public Art Resource Center, SPARC, which some of you may know, which promotes social justice and participatory public arts projects. Since 1980, she's been a professor at the University of California in Los Angeles, where she's a senior professor in Chicano-Chicana Studies and World Art and Cultures departments. In 2003, Baca was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship. Most recently, she received the Distinguished Alumni Award at CSUN, which is also where I teach, so yay, and is being given an honorary doctorate by them in May of this year. Congratulations. Really nice. And she was also, by the way, named the Rockefeller Fellow for the USA Artist Fellowship in 2016. So thank you. And she's going to be interviewed today by Anna Indych-López. Anna Indych-López is an associate professor of art history at the City College of New York and the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Anna is the author of Muralism Without Walls, Rivera, Orozco, and Siqueiros in the United States since 1927 to 1940, and she's also the co-author of Diego Rivera Murals for the Museum of Modern Art. Her new publication, titled Judith F. Baca, is released by the UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center and the University of Minnesota Press, and is available here at the book fair, so go visit. Welcome.
Hello, hello.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
So Judy, I want to begin by soaking in this moment, this incredible year that you've been having. And so on the screen, we have a shot of just a select example of some of the amazing things that have been happening. On the cover of Art News, a profile of Judy for their issue devoted to the concept of the underrated artist, a fantastic profile by Max Duron. We're going to look at this work by Judy, kind of performative piece known as Las Tres Marías in a few minutes. And then her solo exhibition about the Great Wall, which was part of PST at CSUN, curated by Mario Ontiveros, and we're looking at the catalog on the top left, and then the cover of our collaborative book, which is just hot off the presses, and you can see it in the book fair. And so we've collaborated for a number of years on the book, and so we're excited that it's finally out. And now here with the Distinguished Artist Award. And so, Judy, I wanted to start by saying, you know, you're an icon of feminist art, public art, Chicana art, but often when you talk about your career and your work, you talk about how important it is for you to be an LA artist. And since we're here at CAA in LA, I thought maybe could you talk a little bit about what it means to you to be an LA artist?
From LA, right? And you have to say it right, LA. Okay, from LA. Well, I'm actually a person born and raised in the city. I was born at 85th and Central, which is actually Watts. And I was born at a time in which Watts was an African-American community. And there were turnip fields, if you can believe it. It was agriculture, and it was a working and poor community. My mother, a single mother. And I think it defines me in the sense that Los Angeles is a city founded by mulattoes. It's a mixed race city. The founders of Los Angeles, there was really only one Spaniard. The rest of them were mixed slaves, and an African American and Latino connection in Los Angeles has been central to my life. I grew up in a place called Pacoima after those initial years in Watts. And once again, I lived in a community that was defined by a mixed racial groups and kind of brought together African American and Latinos brought together in these working communities. So when I talk about being a Los Angeles artist, I talk about being a person born in a city with, 130 languages in the schools, with places that each ethnic community were like petri dishes that were sort of defined and infinite in the sense that they created kind of unique spaces for the development of people's cultures. And then those places in which they banged up against each other, there was mixture and fusion. And so I think that really defined how I saw the city, both as a Chicana and also as a person who lived always in mixed race and was negotiating that razor's edge between various cultures while trying very hard to do a retention of my own.
And so a sense of place has always been kind of at the heart of your practice, and that you also kind of defined yourself as a landscape painter, a political landscape painter, and LA kind of formulates a big part of that no matter where, because you don't just work in LA, but LA kind of feeds you, that sense of place feeds you.
Right, I think that's in more recent years I've realized that I wasn't a political landscape painter, and that of course the landscape is incredibly political, and Los Angeles is, struggling at this moment with huge areas of gentrification and tremendous changes in our communities. But it's also a segregated city. And, the segregated city is, perhaps more segregated than some places in the South. We are, you can cross a river, and you cross the river and you actually come into a part of our city that certainly just turns brown. And it goes on forever in a brown sepia tone, right? And I think it's lost on people. It's lost in the sense that people, particularly how it's talked about in, promotion for tourism or in film. It gets lost on you that we are a giant population of Latinos, and we're the majority. We're 52%. We're looking at the majority of that population being Mexican, originating from Mexico. And when I was a child, the majority of us were born here. And then there were the immigrants that came, who were the second, I think it was 6 to 4. And now it's the reverse. And so defining territories has been part of the experience I had as a kid, both in the way that neighborhoods were defined and also in the way that places changed dramatically from one neighborhood to the next. And it became part of how I began to configure imagery and begin to think about what kind of work to make.
But then also in terms of your process too, in terms of your methodology, it was kind of exploding that idea of territories, right? And unpacking that by bringing groups of people together, or by taking the youth of LA, the disenfranchised communities, and then working out in San Fernando Valley.
Right.
Right. And
So I like to talk about it in this way. It's like, there's been a lot of interest in people doing outreach to diverse communities to trying to figure out how the arts can be more inclusive and how it can be more diverse. And we've struggled with this. I mean, our institutions have struggled with looking at, aging populations that are the donors to our museums and so forth. And then said, oh my God, how are we going to reach these people? And so outreach has been a term that people use. For me, it was inreach. It was actually coming to my own experience in my own life and coming from that interior. I mean, like all students, being first generation educated, I was encouraged to leave my community, get educated, and get the hell out of here, right? You don't want to go back to Pacoima. You don't want to go back to that experience. Or as my mother said to me, oh my God, I did everything to get you out of here. And then what did you do? You got your degree and then you went right back, right? And then of course people got me very confused in the early days as a young woman. They just would think I was part of a gang. They didn't know whether I was an artist, or they didn't know if I was a gang member. They didn't know if I was a police worker or a youth worker. They called me all kinds of different things. No one called me for an artist for years because what I was doing was so foreign to the arts. It was so outside of the realm of what was considered to be an artist. And then, of course, the idea that I would build monuments, build things of scale. Women don't do that. Women, that's not a job for women. So I was challenging a whole lot of things because it came really, I have to say, it came step by step, coming from an inreach, what I lived through, where I came from, the people I knew, and how I would apply the arts to those I loved.
so then in terms of breaking boundaries and inreach,
Here's a good one. Big boundaries.
yes.
Yes.
So you founded the Social and Public Art Resource Center over 40 years ago, right?
It's actually,
42,
is it 42? Is
42 years ago?
The Sparkers here, correct me, is it 42? 42 years.
It's still going strong, and Deborah Padilla, the executive director, is here.
And Deborah's here, and Carlos Rogel, there's two of our Sparkers, and I think Pablo's here. We don't raise your hands here. These are Spark people.
Yay.
These are the people that make it all keep happening.
So you founded Spark over 42 years ago. And Deborah, actually, you and I had a conversation about this, and it really sparked this idea that the origin story of Spark is a little bit neglected. You've historically neglected. We'll talk about that in a sec. You founded it with the filmmaker Donna Deitch and Christine Schlesinger, two other lesbians. And this story has been that origin story of founding an alternative arts institution and community space by three lesbians. That aspect of it has been somewhat historically neglected, partially because of your resistance to labels and to kind of constrictive identities, be they Chicana, feminist, or lesbian. But I want to ask you, so then, what is significant? How is it significant? Why is it significant to have lesbian and Chicana leadership of a community arts center, an alternative arts space? What does it mean?
Well, I think it's really important to recognize the time that this was happening, and it's really it was a different landscape in 1976 when we were founded. Arthur Schlesinger's daughter, this is Christina Schlesinger, who's depicted in the picture, was here to study in Judy Chicago's feminist studio workshop. I think because she heard the song California Dreamin', right? And she was in Boston and said, I'm going to get to the sun, right? And Donna Deitch, whose mother was a Hungarian Jew who escaped the Holocaust and came to San Francisco and went to a sweatshop. These are really sort of amazing American stories. I mean, she goes to a sweatshop, and within a few years, she begins to design dresses that become the California line for working women. And she becomes a millionaire. I mean, she becomes actually really successful. During this period of time, this Chicana from Watts meets these women sitting in a slideshow by Arlene Raven and other women who were beginning to say, look what women have created. And I had a degree in art by then, and I had never seen these women, and I was completely amazed. And I had put a call out for people to sign up for a mural crew to work with me, and Christina responded. And she began to work with me as a muralist. I had no idea about who her father was. But clearly, it was a moment in which people worked across race, they worked across class, and they formed ideas based on feminist thought, and formed on the idea that we could create a space away from male domination, that we could create a space that would be for public art. There was nothing like that. Public art was really a new field. It was, and community art, the notion that people could make art that would come out of community, that would have a relationship to the community, was outrageous. It was actually not serious, not considered to be serious art at all. So Spark began to create a different territory, a safe territory, and it provided the structure for which I could then begin to do the work I wanted to do. So it was separate and apart from what was the dominant culture. It was outside of the marketplace. I mean, we became really outside of the marketplace. Maybe we should have been a little more in the marketplace. But what we did is that we said, it isn't about the work selling in our gallery. It's about making the space where you can do the first show on the apartheid, in which you can show the first pieces of the quilt, of the AIDS quilt, in which you can show a work that has to do with police brutality, in which you can show work about gang warfare and interrogation of the drug influx and where it was coming from, and which Mrs. Garcia from around the corner could come into a community meeting and say, I don't know what you artists are doing here, you should be doing something about PCP, So we developed the Dustmobile, and we did a whole thing on PCP. I mean, you probably don't even know what it is today, but it was an animal tranquilizer that was just taking devastation in our neighborhoods. And it took all the creative talents of like 10 artists who responded to it and did an amazing series of works, including holograms and photographs and animated films. And we toured it through the whole city, and thousands of kids got educated about PCP. So that was really Spark, a space apart, a creation of a space to do the work that we could dream up that would have no restrictions.
So I want to take off from that as well to talk, move on from that origin story of Spark and In Reach and a safe space, to talk about this work, which has gotten a lot of attention recently because the triptych on the left is prominently featured in the Radical Women exhibition. The photographs that are part of the performance aspect of the piece are in the wonderful show Access Mundo, curated by Undine Chavoya and David Evans France. And it's been written about in the reviews and a lot of social media, Instagram and so on, people, and the cover of Art News. So it's garnered a lot of attention. And in the book, it also serves as a very important kind of linchpin in a chapter called Speaking Back. And it's a complex work. It's a multimedia, multi-part work. So you need to kind of understand how it's made or what it comprises. So on the left-hand side, you have this triptych, which is made up of two colored drawings and a mirror in the middle. And on the back of the triptych, which unfortunately you can't see in this slide. Sorry, let me go back. The back here is a roll and tuck,
Tuck and roll.
tuck and roll, sorry. And it was made by your father?
Yes, actually, my father was an upholsterer, and he did the tuck and roll. And in those days, you could go down to Tijuana with your lowrider car, and you could have your car tuck and rolled, and it was the hot thing to do. And it was part of that time in which lowriders created these amazing artworks that would come down our streets, and the tuck and roll was done exactly in that style.
So you kind of have to go around the piece and see that aspect of it. It's quasi life size. When you see a Radical Women, it's slightly smaller than others. Slightly small. And the colored drawings are, so on the left-hand side, you have a representation of a 1970s Chola figure.
Right.
And then on the right-hand side, you have the representation of a 1940s Pachuca figure, but it's a self-portrait of Judy performing as a Pachuca. And that drawing is based on these photographs that Donna, who was your lover at the time, took the
co-founder of Spark, yeah.
Your co-founder of Spark, took the photographs of you performing for the camera as the Pachuca. And then, and I should say that this piece was done for the very first exhibition of Chicana art, which was at the Women's Building in 1976. And so that triptych was placed within a kind of environment installation that Judy created. And she incorporated, so on the left-hand side, you see an image of her in front of a mural that she created in collaboration with members of the Tiny Locas gang, a gang from Pacoima, a girls' gang that Judy brought into the spaces of the Women's Building. And they collaborated on this mural, which in Chola writing says Mi Barrio Pacoima with a heart, kind of.
They also collaborated on painting up the bathroom.
Oh, you painted the bathroom and stuff?
Oh, yeah, I didn't tell them they could only paint one place. So they kind of hit the whole Women's Building.
You didn't tell me that part.
People were pretty mad, actually.
So, and then for the exhibition, Judy also mounted a performance. And so she kind of recreated this act of transforming herself into the bad girl persona of the 1940s Pachuca. And so that's what we're looking at on the right, this photograph of her transforming herself into a Pachuca. And then those documentary photographs, which were actually slides, were then projected onto this vanity table that you see here with reverse projection, and that stayed the course of the exhibition so that the slides were circulated and were formulated part of the installation. So, multimedia, performance-based is part of the whole thing. This work is very much about transgressions, and it's all done within the space of the Feminist Women's Building, and particularly, and I was very inspired by the work of Catherine Ramirez when we were writing the book, specifically her work on the Pachuca, and she talks about the Pachuca as being a kind of signifying this idea of the aberrant, dangerous, working class, non-white female identity, and that's kind of what you're playing with the figure of the Chola and the Pachuca and this kind of performative aspect of it. But you do this all through kind of, this very humorous, campy, and through this idea of desire, it being kind of at the root of the work. And so I want you to tell the story, please, of the origins of the work.
Okay, part of the imagery actually, as the Pachuca, is was a lot of interest within the Chicano movement about pachucos, about the men. And Jose Montoya, for example, many of the other Chicano leadership were making the images of the pachuco. But there was very little to be seen about the women that were the counterparts. And my cousin, Esther, was a pachuca, and she was in the Florencia gang from South Central. And my mother she was the cautionary tale. You really can't be like her. We're going to send you to Catholic school. We're going to try to keep you from getting into this kind of behavior. And the transformation was really important for me because it was the idea that these girls I went to school with these girls, and they could take up the entire schoolyard. They just link arms, walk through the schoolyard, everybody moved, right? And it's like if you were on the sidewalk, you got off, right? Because they were coming through. And I thought it was like incredible. I just loved it. I mean, I really wanted to be like that. I just thought, I love the idea of power. And I think it was an exploration around what is women's power? These women put razor blades in their hair, so when they got in fights and you tried to grab their hair, you would get cut up with razor blades. They were known to carry switchblades. You can get them at TJ for $7. You know, we all knew where you could get them. It was like, they wore Mary Janes. They had tight skirts, very bad for running. You had to lift up the skirt so that you could run because you couldn't get your legs free. So in one way, it was a very restrictive kind of view. And in the other, the transformation was a very powerful act for me to begin to take on that persona. And then I realized it was a facade. And maybe it was a facade to deal with the white world. It was a facade to say, you can get close, and you might even desire me, because I'm sexy as hell, but don't you touch me. You can't touch me, because I'm dangerous. So that is me at that time, me doing that character. And I had no idea that I would create the perfect selfie site 40 years later. And the center mirror is for you, it's based on the Tres Marias. The whore, the mother, or the virgin. And all of those options for us, which is sort of put out to us as young women, none of them were very appealing to me, except maybe the whore. Seemed like she had the most fun. She could do whatever she wanted. I thought, I'd rather be the whore, right? So the image is really the kind of bad girl. And the center image, when you walk up to the Tres Marias, you can become the third. So what I was doing was I was engaging women and people, and later as I went to the CAA exhibition, which was a Chicano art resistance and affirmation show that was a blockbuster show, the very first show that talked about the production of artworks in the Southwest. Literally, I stood by that piece in that exhibition for 5.5 hours and watched thousands, really hundreds and hundreds of young Chicanas come up and take their picture in front of the mirror and become the intervening third Maria. Who they were was themselves, and that there was another option to the roles that women could play. So it really worked as a method of engaging the audience in interaction with the work and to redefining the roles of a Chicana.
I think it's kind of funny how Cathy Opie was talking about being a good girl.
Yes.
And that in many ways, and a good lesbian, and that the foundations of this work in a way was that kind of disjuncture for you too, about, taking on that persona of the...
Yeah, there's a whole series of other outtakes that are even more outrageous. I mean, I was like, when I looked at the contact sheets and I was, seeing the day in which we were acting out this, the role of the Chicana, it was like, yes, it was completely about the breaking down of following the prescribed role. And essentially, if you didn't follow, particularly within a highly religious family, within a Latino family that was defined by very indigenous Catholicism, to step out of those things meant that you were bad. And also to own your own sexuality was that you were bad. And certainly to walk out of the prescribed, heterosexuality norm in which you were basically going to be having at least 3 or 4 babies by this age, right? And become a maker of children. And I used to say all the time, well, I can make other things besides babies, right? And that was my response to, the role that had been prescribed for me. So I went as far as I could from it. I ran from the role and thought I could be an artist, and God knows why I thought I could do that.
So, on the surface, it would seem that this work is very different from the work that you are primarily known for, but I actually disagree with that. And
And you say that in the book, right?
And I say that in the book, yeah.
You can see it in the book. Yeah.
Well, obviously, the ephemerality of this piece is very distinct from the Great Wall, but there's certain links. There's a mural in the Pachuca piece. There's the engagement with the community, but I think more than that, it's like this. It's the spirit of the work. It's this idea of speaking back. It's this idea of the historical tensions that I feel a lot of your work deals with. The idea of resistance. Okay, so the Great Wall. So I talk about it in relationship to this idea of historical tension and resistance and so on, and it is a model of public art, both in terms of its method, in terms of process, and its aesthetics, and that's something I want to get to as well. But I think for the purposes here, what I want to begin with in terms of tackling this monumental project is thinking about this idea of a model of public art, and especially for now. But just in case any of you don't know what the Great Wall of Los Angeles is. So there was a tour that Judy gave in conjunction with CAA. Hopefully some of you were able to take it, because it's amazing to experience the Great Wall with Judy. But if you can't do that, please go out to the San Fernando Valley and see this mural, which was created over the course of 5 summers between 1976 and 1983 with the disenfranchised communities of youth of color, depicting an alternative history of California and America from the perspective of people of color, queer people, minorities, et cetera. And during a time in which there were no textbooks and just the beginnings of departments of ethnic studies, so really kind of people's history and a kind of alternative history, and done in collaboration with the youth, with teams of artists, and on a monumental scale, 13 and a half feet tall, and how ultimately right now, 1,600
about half a mile now.
Yeah. And it's an unfinished work. It's a work in progress. It will continue. The imagery goes from the beginnings of time here in California and presently up to the 1950s. And so this kind of model of working where you were able to kind of navigate your politicized engagement with your art practice, a kind of art activism, was very poignant back then, continues to be, and I think is particularly urgent right now. So first of all, can you talk to us about how you developed this model and what you see this model being from your perspective?
Well, I would like to say that I came to muralism with the sort of knowledge of the great Mexican masters when I first started. But I didn't, because I actually came to it through street writing, through roll calls by gang members on buildings and public sites. And I saw this kind of community billboard happening in the neighborhoods. I was running the City of Los Angeles mural program. I was working in Boyle Heights. I was the director of murals in Boyle Heights, the Some of the very earliest murals that were done in the city were done there. And it wasn't really until I realized how important these spaces were, the occupation of those spaces, these sort of guerrilla actions of kids. And at that time, it wasn't people doing piecing or bombing in which they were doing artworks. They were actually just making a record of who they were. And very often it said, yo soy, I am, and then there would be a list of names of the people that were part of their neighborhood, just like the girls from the Tiny Locas, who were part of a larger group called the Cyclonas, and the Tiny Locas were a clique below them. I mean, it's like you could understand the hierarchy and who these people were. So I got very interested in the way that those spaces could be negotiated and that people could work together across differences and perhaps territories. It was, again, the notion of territory. And I grew up not very far from the Los Angeles River, which was the largest building project in America at the time. And so after one of the last giant floods in the city of Los Angeles, the city fathers decided that they would begin to mitigate the flooding. And they began concreting, the Army Corps of Engineers began concreting the Los Angeles River. This wasn't an easy feat, so it took them years and years. And the concreting of the river wasn't really complete until in the early 70s. And at that point, I like to say that unlike God, at the end of the seventh day, when he looked at all that he had built, he didn't say, God said, well, this is good. The Army Corps of Engineers said, oh my God, we really fucked up here. Right? We've built dirt belts on either side of these channels. We have created divisions between neighborhoods. We've moved the water from the streets of Los Angeles to the ocean too swiftly. That's creating pollution. That we have to create a spreading ground to get water back into the aquifer. And oh my God, now we have to create a mosquito abatement division, and on and on and on. So it was in 1974 that the Army Corps of Engineers came to me, and as I was leading the City of Los Angeles mural program in all these different ethnic neighborhoods, in a city divided. So in the Chinese community, I was working with the Chinese, I was working with Thai communities, I was working with black communities. And they said, would you be interested in this site and helping us do a transformation, the beautification of this one segment of the Los Angeles River? So I went to the river, and I was standing on the river, over a bridge, and looking at the river, and I realized that this completed segment was like a scar. It was a complete loss of the river. And it just came to me that what we could do is we could tattoo that scar. And so the Great Wall became metaphorically, and a metaphor that, frankly, it took me years to speak aloud because it was so sacrilegious, it was so irreverent, that it was the tattoo. I was going to create the tattoo on the scar where the river once ran. And if you could disappear the river, then you could also disappear the stories of the people, and that they were allied. Social justice and environmental justice were connected. And that if we could make that set of imagery that began to tell the story of the people, and all these neighborhoods that I was working in, what would happen if we brought people from each of these neighborhoods that had no contact with each other, and we put them in this test tube 13 and a half feet below ground level? And then we really worked on getting along. That was much easier said than done. Let me say, I thought that was a great idea, and I went in with this absolute naiveness, And there was a reporter recently who said to me, Judy, what would the Judy Baca at your age now say to the young, some 20-something Judy Baca about doing this particular piece? And I thought about it really seriously, and I thought, I would want to say, shut up. Don't you say a thing to her, you older woman telling her this younger. When you would discourage her, you would tell her how hard it was going to be. You were going to tell her how it was going to take half of her life. You would tell her that you'd be in this heat at 118 degrees, that you would watch kids die, that you would see, you'd go through this thing where you'd make a family that you could never get rid of, a giant one of kids. you would suffer all their lives and you would have a lifetime commitment to making of this narrative work. So I began because I was pissed off. I was pissed off at the rivers concreting. I was pissed off at the loss of this space. It was a territory taken from neighborhoods. And I began to think, okay, we can try to do this. We can begin to work together and make it happen. And it took off like a snowball, and then it took me in the process. And I couldn't stay pissed off because that's not sustaining. I mean, you can't keep working on something like this for half your life without being in love. And so I fell in love with the place that I was working. I fell in love with the process. I fell in love with the kids I was working with and all the people who were telling me their stories to put at the Great Wall. And it is not done. We are in the midst of the 60s and 70s and the development of new segments. And I think actually this part, it gives you a bit of the scale, the notion of the scale. The piece is, these are panels, they're 13 and a half feet high, and then you're looking at 350-foot segments. So, you know, really a person's body standing next to them comes up, you know, like I guess if I'm standing there alongside, go back to one of these images, you'll see me standing alongside it, you'll see the scale of the work. The scale is enormous, and the process of the collection of content. For example, my head would come to, oh, there you go, you get an idea of seeing the Dust Bowl refugee, and you can see the scale of this painting. And also all the years of that, you know, what it means to have a sustained work of this scale, working with people and bringing new generations in and, you know, unfolding the story of the Great Wall.
I mean, the other day when we were talking, you said, you know, the one thing people want to know is how did you do this? And I think part of it is this idea of the massive labor, the coordination, the scale, all of it. But I think also part of it is this idea of the fusion of an art practice with a political practice, with identity politics, with, you know, all of it. And I guess that's kind of the question I was asking, like, those people interested today in making, those people interested in making that kind of an art, politicized, engaged art, what can we learn from the process of the Great Wall?
What did I learn, or what does everybody learn?
What now, thinking about it now, reflecting back and telling audiences now about it?
Well, I mean, the Great Wall, I think, actually created for us a model methodology, which is actually applied to all of Spark's projects. And we've taken that process of the engagement of people in the process. So the question is, how would you create a monument of this scale without it becoming a children's piece? You know, and make it worth having something that would be kept. You know, it's been declared a site of historic importance. The Department of Interior has now declared it a site of historic importance, and it's been designated as a historic site. So how do you bring that, how do you elevate it? What happened was that in this process, each year we refined it. We refined the process so that we could engage the youth on an educational level. We divided up the labor into different types of in the process, different type of work in the process. There were kids who got trained in working with the scaffolding. There were those who were really good at driving the trucks. There were people we even had a young man who was educatively handicapped and really couldn't paint inside lines, but he was a great water boy, and he made sure everybody drank every 30 minutes because we were all getting sunstroke. You know, we created labor that would make it possible for everybody to participate. We made a very wide reach to people in terms of inclusion. Historians, people who lived through the experiences, and we brought it through a series of prisms. So this wasn't a participation that was, you know, onlookers, but people who really could have input, like through a prism of gender. What did women think about this set of imageries depicting the 1950s? Judy Chicago came in, for example, at one point when we were doing the 50s, and she said, you got to put them in the pink ghetto, right? And so she influenced the transformation of the suburbia into the pink ghetto. People who lived through the experience, people who, we collected metaphors from the people who could tell us. I was on the fighting 442nd, brought from the internment camps as a Japanese soldier that was among the most decorated people in the military. And we were the very fabric of America. So that became the image of him, of the Japanese becoming the fabric of America. So we collected metaphors. We ran it through immigration status. What does it mean? When did your family come? You know, what does it mean to you in terms of your contributions of the building of the country? So, you know, sexual orientation, all of these different levels of understanding of the differences that could be replicated. So what I think the Great Wall has taught me, and is doing now with another generation, as my mentee Carlos is moving forward with the next segments of the wall, we're working on new segments. We are looking at new technological advancements. So at a certain point, you're going to be able to walk along the Great Wall, hold up your smartphone, and you're going to hear Paul Robeson sing. You know, we're going to be moving through the process of moving us outside of the channel in a Great Wall Institute that'll work year-round. And the new segments of the 60s and 70s and 80s will be developed. So this is the exciting part as we're looking at some of these drawings, is that lunch counter drawing proposals as we're beginning to develop these. We had the great gift of listening to people like Tom Hayden just before he died. We've listened to, and I love, he said, organizing in the 60s was about who you fell in love with, right? And he just gives us another perspective on how we could depict that moment. So we're collecting now the metaphors, the stories of the people, and we're developing the 60s, 70s, 80s. And I suspect that perhaps beyond my lifetime, the work will keep going with another generation and new people within that process. That's the dream. And it's a dream that just keeps going by itself, right?
So Judy, I've been told we have one question left.
Okay.
Okay, and I really wanted to get to aesthetics, so why don't we...
Is there more?
Yeah, so why don't we just... Oh, no question, no. Oh. Up to you, Judy. Would you like to open it up, or?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I want to just say that the new works that we're doing now, my new work is working in digital imaging, which includes both not only the materials, the historical materials, but also, using technology so that we can actually infuse imagery from the time and create these giant works painted on screen and then outputted into giant prints that can be preserved forever and even moved. And this last set of work that we're showing is just drafts for the work that we are currently doing in the Central Valley of California, looking at the issues that are affecting all the farm working communities. So I'm happy to take a question if somebody wants to take it.
Is there, we have time, bit more time, is there a burning question?
I'm so grateful that you're here. You're like one of my sheroes, so thank you for being here. I'm a muralist in New York, and I'm really interested to know how much are you involved still in the painting process? I know for me, it's become a little taxing on my body, being on scaffolding and ladders, and so I'm interested to know the physicality of the work. Do you work with assistants? And this is, I guess, logistical for me to kind of know where I'm headed and how that works.
Can I just say something before she answers? Judy is a force of nature. Has always been and continues to be. She's up there on the scaffolding.
Yes, I am. Well, in 2011, I painted through the whole summer with a team to do the restoration. Carlos helped lead that effort. I am still physically capacitated, but increasingly I see that I can make a mark on screen that keeps me from having to climb 3 tiers. And I think actually some of the digital processes are making it possible for me to paint on screen and actually to keep my practice as a painter going. But there's no substitute for the actual painting. And as long as I'm physically able, I'm going to be on scaffolding. So you're still there? I'm still there. I have to pace myself a little differently than I did when I was 20, but most definitely, I was actually at one point painting at the Great Wall during the restoration. There was a group of the young guys who were working with me. They were standing below me on the scaffolding. I said, "What are you guys looking at? What's the matter?" He said, "We can't believe how fast you are." I was like, they were laughing. I can't believe you're that fast. So yeah, you develop a skill level that makes it easier and faster for you. But there are methods now, I think, that as we go forward, the construction, you're looking at these pieces on the wall here about, the issues that are happening for farm workers and healthcare problems all through the central part of California. It's going to be 8 cities that we're working in, and these are constructed now with all these photographs, and then will be painted on screen, and then will be put on the site, but they'll also be moved into the state legislature as we go to the midterm elections and people begin to see that we really need to preserve California as a democratic state, that we are in trouble with some major issues for the farm working communities of people who feed the nation in California are dealing with pollution, they're dealing with police violence and the pipeline to the prisons and so forth. All those things, each one of these cities is telling one of those stories. And still, we're doing face-to-face with the community and developing the content for that. That's the critical element, face-to-face, the continued collection of the story of the people and their relationship to the work that is being done. They're not passive, they're part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy and Anna. Thank you so much for coming to the Distinguished Artist Interviews. Please join us down in Art Exchange. There is a cash bar if that gets you there faster. Enjoy your evening, your CAA. Come ask your committee members, board members, everybody questions. Thank you.